You can go ahead and open up your sketchbook or notebook, whatever you're writing on, piece of paper, to where you left off yesterday. Just a reminder, you are going to be submitting these notes for credit. So whenever we lecture and we take notes, I want you to set up the sketchbook with MLA. And if you miss a day or two, or however long you're gone for, you can always go back and look at a lecture and look at the lecture note slide numbers that I've indicated at the beginning of the lecture. So you make sure that you have everything in the notebook that I'm looking for. All right. So we set up every entry with MLA format, and that helps us to stay organized. So when I say I want to see the lecture notes from What is Clay on the 28th, you can easily find those. And I prefer that you keep everything in one place. So try your best to keep organized. And yesterday we talked about the three ingredients, the main ingredients in clay, and also their purposes. And I told you that one of those ingredients is a higher percentage than the other two. And that ingredient is going to allow the clay to be more plastic so that you can easily shape it and mold it when it's moist. So out of those three ingredients, let's see if we all get the same response. What is the ingredient that has the highest percentage in clay out of those three? Go ahead and respond to that poll. All right, waiting for 7 more of you to respond to that poll. I see one person's not getting it. So if you want to type into the chat, if you want to look back at the notes. Okay, waiting for 3 more people to respond to that poll. 1 more person. All right, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results here. So yesterday we actually were more accurate on this one. So alumina is the top ingredient in clay's mixture. And what alumina does is it allows the clay mixture to be more plastic. And the term plastic refers to molding and shaping clay when wet. Okay, it's malleable, it's easy to work with. So yes, there are 3 main ingredients in clay, but alumina is the top one. Silica is also a main ingredient, and it helps the clay molecules bind together. Feldspar is a combination of alumina and silica, and it allows the glaze colors to be rich and vibrant. So alumina was the correct answer for that one. It is the top ingredient out of the 3 in the clay's mixture, and it has the highest percentage. Okay? So I'm testing your knowledge before you guys go on to the homework, and then also take a test on this after we do our first project. All right, so we talked about the 6 stages of clay, and each stage, the clay has different qualities. So I want to look at those again briefly and go over those. I'm not watching that video again, but just reviewing the stages independently of one another. So stage 1, we're going to make this today. Slip, a ceramic glue that is a mixture of clay and water. It's about a 50-50 ratio, and we use it to join 2 or more pieces of clay together. Stage 2, plastic. This is when the clay is fresh out of the bag. It's soft, it's workable, it's easy to mold into your desired form or shape. Stage 3, you've made a form. You've perfected it, you've smoothed it, you've refined it, and you've got it to a stage that's known as leather hard, where the clay has slightly hardened, but you can still carve it, indent it, and add texture. After that, you want to let the clay dry out before I put it into the kiln. So you let it get dry as a bone. At this stage, you cannot do anything else to change the way that your project looks. It's dry. It's like a bone. Imagine taking a bone and trying to change the shape. It's hard. It's dense. There's not much you can do besides take a knife and shave away from it, right? So same thing with clay. At this stage, there's not a lot you can do. It's dry as a bone. It's ready for firing. So I put it into the kiln at about 1900 degrees, and I drive out all that extra water. At this point, the clay's pores shrink, the project itself shrinks as a whole, and all that extra moisture is driven out due to the heat. Then you get it back and you add that glaze that's rich in feldspar, and I put it into the kiln a second time. I fire it a little bit hotter, and then once it cools, you get a finished product that's ready for use. Okay? So there's the 6 stages in a nutshell. It shrinks from start to finish. So after 2 firings, it shrinks consistently. And I remember the first time I took a ceramics class, I had a boyfriend at that time who was 6'5", about 240 pounds, just a big guy. And I made him a cup for one of our anniversaries. This is when I was really young and we celebrated like 3 months, 6 months, all that stuff. Anyway, I remember that the cup shrank so much so that he couldn't even get his finger into the handle. So unfortunately, he could not use it. So we'll talk about that one for you drying the clay. We'll link up on that. But for now, just worry about making, okay? So with that said, if you're making a mug, if you're making something functional for someone, remember it's going to shrink. So our first project is just a little bowl. And when you first make it, it looks pretty good size. I ask you to make it 3 by 5 inches wide in the opening. But after you get it back, some people don't even recognize it when they pick it up. They're like, holy moly, it's so small. So I want to show you a visual of the 6 stages of clay in a nutshell. This is one of my favorite references to show. You're going to be seeing more of this guy. His name's John the Potter. He is actually a ceramics teacher, just like myself, and he's an artist independently of that. And he runs through the stages of clay in a nutshell, starting with a hunk of clay and a ball to a finished piece of pottery that you can use. He's also super fun to watch and enthusiastic. I tend to lose attention pretty quickly, so I try to give you guys resources that are engaging. So let's take a look at John the Potter. I'm going to ask you a couple more polls after we watch this just to test your knowledge on the different stages of clay.
What is up, guys? Welcome to John the Potter Studios. So good to have you. I have a super exciting video for you. Today, we're bringing it back to the basics, the pottery basics. How do we get from a ball of clay to a sweet piece of pottery that you can sell, that you can love using? So we're just going to quickly go through clay to throwing, to trimming, putting handles on, to bone dry, to bisque firing, to glaze firing, like the whole process in one video, basically how we get from here to here. So if you're new to this channel, we do pottery videos, we do business videos, we do just fun videos about my life. And we do a sale about once every month. Our next sale coming up is May 11th. We have a bunch of sweet pots. So May 11th at 6 p.m. if you want to join us for the next sale. All right, let's get into this video. So we start out with clay. And before we get started, I want to just say that each individual step in this process, you can dive really deep into that step. Like for example, I'm using a buff stoneware clay from Cont'd clay, but there's 1,000 different kinds of clay you can use. You can dig up your own clay and use it. But for the purposes of this video, we're starting with this piece of clay. So we start with this clay. We put it on the wheel and we throw this pot. So this pot I threw 4 or 5 hours ago. And one of the most common questions I get is, how do you know when it's ready to flip it over? And my answer to that is, you flip it over and you cut it off. You can cut it off right away. You can wait a little bit. We're going to cut it off right now using a wire. And my answer to this is, you want to get it flipped over as soon as you possibly can without manipulating the shape. So like if you try and move it too early, then you're gonna press it and it's gonna move weird. So basically you wanna flip it over as quick as possible because you want the pot to dry as even as possible. That's one of the biggest things in pottery is you want it to dry as even as possible. So then this pot we threw this morning, this one we threw yesterday, and it's much more firm. It's much firmer than this one. So this one is ready to trim and to put a handle on. So we're gonna do that really quick.
Don't forget the slip.
The next stage after this, after you put the handle on and you trim it like you saw, then is you let it dry. And so this still has moisture in it, but you can't bisque fire it. Bisque is the term for the first firing. And you can't bisque fire it until it's completely dry, right? Because you don't want any moisture in it. So this is what it looks like when it's completely bone dry. This mug I made it like 4 or 5 days ago. It's been sitting, and so it's completely dry. It's ready to get loaded into the bisque fire. So the bisque fire is the first firing, and typically it's at a lower temperature than the glaze firing. So you would, anywhere from cone 04 to cone 06 is what you bisque in a kiln. So you put it in there, it cooks for however long. Typically the bisque fire is a slower firing than the glaze firing because you want to make sure that all the moisture gets out. Then it comes out and it looks like this. This is like a pinkish color, right? This is what it looks like in this clay body. Sometimes it'll look a little bit whiter like this. This is a bisque piece that's like this. This is when you're ready to throw glaze on it, right? So then you can take any of these glaze buckets, which I'll show you. I'm going to glaze this one. And then you load it back into the kiln, and typically you would fire it to a higher temperature, which would be the glaze firing. And then that is when you get out the sweet finished glazed pottery like that, like this. And that's the pottery basics in a nutshell. That is how we get from clay to bisqueware to glazeware to finished pieces. That's it. I want to thank you guys so very much for joining me in this video. If you're interested in buying this.
All right, we don't want to buy anything. We're going to make our own stuff. Love John the Potter. He is the best. So let me ask you a couple more questions. Let's test your knowledge from yesterday. Okay, what stage of clay is considered soft and workable? In this stage, clay can be easily molded and shaped when moist. Go ahead and answer that question on the poll. Oof, we're all over the map here. Look at your notes. Waiting for 4 more people to respond to that poll. 3 more people. 2. 1 more. All right, so I'm going to share the results of this one. The correct answer, 50% of you got this right, is plastic. Stage 2, clay is plastic. It's got a high content of alumina. It's fresh out of the bag. You can easily mold it and shape it when it's moist and wet. Leather hard is like a piece of leather, like imagine a leather jacket. You can move the leather, but you can't really puncture it. You can't stick a knife through it very easily because it's hard like leather. It's tough. It's holding its shape. Bisqueware, you've put it in the kiln and you've driven out all the water. So there's no way in heck that you can easily shape it because it's hard. It's been fired. So you cannot add clay to pottery that's been fired. So the correct answer for that one is plastic. Clay that's fresh out of the bag, plastic, can easily be molded and shaped when moist. Stage 2, plastic. All right. So want to clarify those misconceptions and remember that when you are approaching that same question on the homework. Okay, first note for today is the word kiln. A kiln is an oven that we use to drive out all the extra moisture and fire the pottery. So we fire pottery twice. We fire it once to drive out the water, and then a second time after we glaze it. So this oven or furnace will cure the pottery, harden the clay, and reveal a finished product with no moisture. So go ahead and write down the definition of a kiln where you left off in your notebook yesterday, and then type kiln into the chat once you have that note recorded. And I know somebody just joined late. If you join late, go ahead and send me a private message so I can mark you here. Once you've got the definition of a kiln, an oven used to bake, fire, burn, dry, and harden clay. Okay, thank you. So Jilma, we just started our notes. We're just picking up from where we left off yesterday. So go ahead and open up that notebook and you can start right in there. Once you have the definition of a kiln, go ahead and type kiln in the chat. Okay, let me give you about 30 more seconds to record that note. I'm waiting to hear from about 9 of you to confirm in the chat. All right, moving on. Wedging. Wedging clay is super crucial to the process of making ceramics. And the reason why is because sometimes clay has air bubbles in it, and those air bubbles can cause an explosion in the kiln. Last semester, I think we made about 330 projects, pretty dang close to that. Every kid made a project and we fired it. And when there was an air bubble, we knew about it because that air bubble was like a ticking time bomb in the kiln. It would explode, and not only did it ruin the person's project, it took out everybody's project around it. So we only had that occur one time, taking out about 4 projects. So we need the clay, and this is called wedging. And wedging is when we push the clay down repeatedly in a rhythmic motion on a hard surface, our workboard, to remove air bubbles to avoid explosions. Go ahead and write down the term wedging and type wedging in the chat once you've got it in your notebook. So I want you to consider this. If you have long nails, particularly girls with acrylic nails, it's going to be hard for you to, number 1, wedge clay, and number 2, not get nail marks all over your pottery. I'm looking at my nails. I probably need to cut them. Never can I ever get a manicure as an artist. It doesn't last long. So we need to make sure also this weekend that nails are trimmed and short. Anyone with long nails, I'm sorry, especially if you're used to having an acrylic set. It's really super hard to work with clay if you have long nails. A couple things you can do if you want to try to keep the nails is put a glove over your hands when working. All right, once you got the definition of wedging, which is repeatedly pushing the clay on a hard surface to remove air bubbles and moisture, type it into the chat. All right, so here's how to wedge. And this is a struggle for many new ceramic artists, and that's okay. I remember it took me months to figure this out, and I was in college like, what exactly am I supposed to be doing? So we practice and we practice and we practice, because it would be a damn shame if we made something super badass and it had an air bubble in it because we forgot to wedge. So let's take a look at how to wedge.
Before working with clay, it is necessary to remove air bubbles. This is done by a technique called wedging. If you don't wedge, your work will...
Look at that obliteration. If you don't wedge, one little tiny air bubble can cause this type of explosion. Because when heated at high temperature, kapoof. And it's happened to me, it's happened to students, it's happened to professionals. So we don't want it to happen. We try to avoid it by wedging.
Will explode in the kiln. So let's learn how to wedge. First, hit the clay into a cube. Position one edge so it faces you. Make sure to stand up for more leverage. Place the heels of your hands on the edge facing you. Gently push down, then forward. Find the edge of the cube that is farthest from you. Rock that edge back towards yourself. Again, place the heels of your hands on the edge and gently push down and forward. Rock the edge back and repeat at least 10 times.
Notice how the artist is working on wood, not plastic, not metal, but wood.
Notice the shape of the clay. Because it looks like a ram, this wedge is called the ram's head spiral. If clay sticks to the table, use the wedge clay to pick it up. Hit the clay into a cube again. Have one edge facing yourself. Place heels of hands on that edge. Repeat the entire wedging process 10 more times. Hit the clay into a cube again. Now your clay is ready to work with.
So we wedge the clay approximately 20 times. I always tell my students, wedge more than you think is necessary, just to be sure that we don't have an air bubble, or else you're going to end up with something like this. This could be an air bubble that was existing in the clay as soon as you open the bag, or an air pocket could be caused by pressing your nails or your fingertips too deeply into the clay when you are wedging. So again, air pockets are like ticking time bombs in the kiln. We want to wedge the clay to avoid explosion. Go ahead and write down the definition of air pockets, both bullet points, and type air pockets into the chat. This is your last note for today. So again, being careful with our fingertips when wedging to avoid air pockets. We don't want any explosions. Once you've got that note recorded, type air pockets in the chat. Okay, so after this note today, you guys and gals, we're done with the notes for this lecture. So you want to double check at the top of the lecture before turning in the notes that you have everything that I've asked for so you can get full credit. I'll let you know when we're going to upload those notes, not this weekend. You've got enough on your plate, so I don't like to overwhelm you. We'll come back to submitting the notes later in next week. Let's take another 30 seconds or so to get that definition into the notebook. Okay, I'm going to move on, and we're going to look at one last video for today. Let me tell you a little bit of a preface before playing the video. So, as you get to know me, you're gonna learn that I love hippy dippy stuff. I love anything organic. I love when people can make and create things using their bare hands and limited resources. So this girl, she goes out into the wild in Arizona. She lives off the land. She harvests her own clay, alumina, and silica, wedges the clay, mixes up her own clay mixture. Then she creates pots using her hands. She has a watermelon carcass, the outside shell of a watermelon that she uses to store water. And she makes her own fire to fire the pots instead of having an electric kiln like we use. Then she makes her own glaze. She makes her own paintbrush. She paints the clay and she fires it a second time. So there's so many cool things that are happening here. And I want you to think about this. Ceramics isn't easy. And the reason why I push you guys, and I will continue to do that, is because once we're done with this whole computer world, as you noticed on Wednesday, when the server is down, we can't do anything. So what are you physically and actually capable of? What can you produce with your bare hands? Having a skill set is super valuable. So I want you to pick one specific part of the video. And don't just tell me everything was cool. Pick one specific part that you find interesting about this girl's artistic process. All right, so let's take a look and be paying attention and tell me what was your favorite part. Here we go. Love that video. Just love how she's living off the land like that. That whole process took about 2 weeks to get 7 pots. So go ahead and think about what you saw. And I want you to take one part of that video and type in the chat right now what you found the most interesting